Welcome to the Value Stuff Podcast. I am your host, Dan Glazier. I am a personal property appraiser and I value stuff for a living. Thank you so much for listening. So today I want to talk about sentimental value. And why do I want to talk about sentimental value? Is I think it's a funny value because it doesn't, I don't know if the word's funny, but it doesn't have a monetary value, but it's probably the most important value when we're dealing with any kind of estate or downsizing, or, whether downsizing a loved one, if we put them in long-term care facility, or even it's our stuff and we have to decide what we're going to keep or donate or throw away. And sentimental value, I think it's such an important, value. And I also think, I'm on this, I don't know if it's kick or, I am working on a book and I am working on a keynote speaking talk about, how we have to have a plan for our stuff, after we pass on, just so it makes it so easier for our loved ones. But part of that plan is the sentimental, the sentimental values, because a lot of times we don't communicate to the people we love and the people, we care about. And the sentimental values and the items that have memories and family heirlooms, they end up, getting donated or sold or, or sometimes even in a landfill. And I think a lot of these items, if our loved ones knew the story behind them, they're more apt to keep the items, or at least find a really nice home for them, or help the legacy live on. Our stuff, a lot of times our stuff is our legacy. And I want to give an example of how to stuff with our legacy. So I'm going to talk. It's about an object. So when I was in my early 20s, I was walking down Danforth Avenue in Toronto, and an older gentleman stopped me. And I don't think I'd ever met him before. And he looked at me and he said, "You're a Clark." I was like, "Clark?" That was my grandfather's name. And this is my mom's maiden name. I said, "Yeah." He said, so he told me this story about my grandfather sold him this German camera that my grandfather had acquired in Germany during the war, World War II. My grandfather had been in, he lied about his age, went in the Canadian Army when he was 17 years old and did the whole war in Europe. But he proceeded to tell me about my grandfather and what a great man he was. And I never got to meet my grandfather. He died, he had a heart attack and died when he was 39 years old. So I never got to meet my grandfather. So it was this object that was, some of the legacy of my grandfather. So, I thought it was great. Had I been a little more mature, I guess, and older, I would have tried to buy the camera back from the gentleman if he still had it. But I don't know if he still had it. But the point of the story here is, the legacy and the sentimental value in that, right? So, if that camera remained in our family, but then all of a sudden it's just in a box and it's just, it's just some German camera worth $25, right? And it ends up getting donated. But if, it's the story behind that. So if you have these items, or your grandparents have these items, or your parents have these items, that are sentimental to them, you ask the story behind them. Find out what the sentimental value is, because I think that's the most important thing, is sentimental value. And, by letting people know your sentimental values behind them and the stories behind them, the family heirlooms, you probably think, nah, my grandchildren don't want to know about this, or my children don't want to know about this, or I think they do. And that's why sentimental value is so important. You need to talk to them about these objects that are important to you. And the reason you need to do that is so they don't end up in the landfill and they don't end up being donated. That is so important. So that's the sentimental value, because it's such a personal value. And the reason also I think you need to discuss this with your children, there's so many times when I've seen, families upset, and they're not upset that, it's not the money necessarily. Of course, people fight over money. Let's be real here. But often they're just hurt that items just got sold or discounted or they're, given away because they meant something to somebody. So when sentimental value, the reason you have to have these discussions, sentimental value isn't always necessarily important to you, the items you have, but they might be sentimental to your children because they have memories attached of them with you, or your grandchildren. They're sentiment because they're real. I think it's very important that we preserve our legacy, and it's the sentimental values and our legacy that go hand in hand here. Also, another thing I want to touch, and this is just because I've seen this quite often where people will, call me and they're like, it's an estate, but they say the estate is passed, it's gone through all the probate and all the legal things, but there's so much stuff left over, they don't know what to do with it. And just recently I'd had a conversation with somebody and they were, they'd had a loved one that passed and suddenly, wasn't expected. And it wasn't that recent, so it was several years ago. But they were saying to me, like, I can't let go of these items. So they wanted, I was helping them with the value of the items. But they couldn't let go of the items because they were sentimental to them. And, I said to them, well, you don't have to let go of them. If they're important to you and you care about them, why? Why? Because society's telling us to be minimalist, or you're saying like you got to let go and move on. Well, listen, this is why I'm talking about sentimental value. That is so important to you. If you want to preserve those memories, the time will come when you'll be like, yeah, I'd like to see these. Maybe I'll donate these things, or I'll give these things away, or I'll sell them. The time will come. But if the time's not now, that's okay. I think that's really important to know that's part of this sentimental value. Is objects do, they hold memories for us, and they're personal. So it's not necessarily, the time will come, if your whole house, like, yes, if you have a whole house of stuff and it's like, it's borderline hoarding, like, yeah, we can help you out. But there's, you can still take, a small percentage of that stuff. It's sentimental to you. It doesn't matter what the value is monetarily. It's what the value is to you that's important. And I guess it's, full circle here. That's why we have to have the discussions with our family too about when we're estate planning. Like, these, this cup and saucer, or this tea set, or whatever, it doesn't matter. These tools, my grandfather used to do woodworking with me. And so you pass these on. I think that's really, really important, especially in this day and age of, social media and everything's so busy and quick. And you're, we're being told like, be a minimalist, or, no. Sentimental value is a different animal altogether. And if things are important to you, there is that fine line, if you collect dolls and you got $10,000 and you can't move in your house, maybe that might not necessarily be sentimental there. That's different, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about, just certain objects and items that are so important to you, and, you want them, you want them, this legacy to continue. So talk to your children, talk to your grandchildren, talk to your nieces and nephews, talk to your friends so they know what items are important to you and what items are sentimental. So thank you so much. I know this is, this is kind of me just going on and on here, but it's just, this is something dear to my heart about sentimental value, because people think, it's almost like a guilt behind sentimental value. They don't want to burden people with it, or, they want to say, oh, I have to get rid of all this stuff because, because it shouldn't be important to me. But no, if sentimental value is the most important value. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much. Dan Glazier, the value of stuff. I hope this helps. And if we can help in any way, just contact us. I'll put my contact information in the show notes. Subscribe and share so we can grow this podcast. Again, sentimental value, no monetary value necessarily, but probably the most important value. Thank you so much. The value of stuff, Dan Glazier.